On Sunday, June 22nd, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched a surprise attack against the Soviet Union. It was the start of Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union during World War II. With an enormous combat force, causing unprecedented death and destruction, Operation Barbarossa is considered the largest invasion and also the bloodiest conflict in human history. The German plan to invade Soviet Union. Insisting on the necessity of Lebensraum, living space, Adolf Hitler set up an ambitious plan to conquer Eastern Europe to find a new territory for the Germans who, he believed, were a superior Aryan race. On the 22nd of September 1938, Nazi Germany signed the Munich Agreement with Italy, Britain, and France, by which Czechoslovakia must cede its border regions and defenses to Nazi Germany. To avoid a possible Soviet-German conflict, on the 23rd of August 1939, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and Germany signed the Treaty of Non-Aggression, which provided a written guarantee of peace between each party towards the other, and a declared commitment that neither government would ally itself or aid an enemy of the other. Still, each side was highly suspicious of the other's intentions. In the summer of 1940, the tension between the Soviets and Germany over the Balkan territories intensified, and Germany began to suffer from the severe depletion of oil supply. Hitler had no other option but to start the war with the Red Army. In December 1940, Hitler issued Directive No. 21, Operation Barbarossa, a code name for an offensive war against what he perceived to be his biggest enemy, the Soviet Union. To prepare for the battle, 3/4 of the German force, along with the Axis soldiers, were deployed for the Blitzkrieg to completely destroy the USSR. Despite continuously enhancing military and munitions, by the start of the Great Patriotic War, the Soviet Union was still inferior to the German army in terms of quantity and quality of weapons and equipment. As a result, the Soviet Red Army, despite superiority in armed forces, continuously failed in the early stages of the war. German and Soviet preparations. Based on 3 primary strategic objectives set out by Adolf Hitler in the Barbarossa, German forces were divided into 3 great army groups. Army Group North, with the target of Leningrad. Army Group Center, in charge of Moscow. Army Group South, attacking Kiev and Ukraine. With 29 divisions and the support of Luftwaffe 1 and Hitler's Finnish allies, Army Group North, under the command of Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leb, advanced to the north with the aim of capturing Leningrad. Army Group Center of Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, with 50 divisions and 2 brigades and the support of Luftwaffe 2, attacked the capital, Moscow. Many of the Soviet Union's most important cities, such as Pskov, Novgorod, Brest-Litovsk, Minsk, Mogilev, and Vitebsk, were seized by the German army. On 17th July, Field Marshal Fedor von Bock captured Smolensk, the key to Moscow. At the same time, Army Group South, under the command of Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, with 46 divisions, destroyed a large part of Ukraine. The initial attacks caused massive loss of lives and tremendous material damage for the Soviet Union. After the Battle of Smolensk and Kiev, the Red Army no longer outnumbered the Germans. To defend Moscow, Stalin had to employ 800,000 men in 83 divisions, but no more than 25 divisions were fully effective. On the 30th September 1941, the Germans unleashed the Operation Typhoon, the drive to Moscow. In front of Army Group Center was a series of elaborate defensive lines that barred the way to Moscow. The first blow took the Soviets completely by surprise when the 2nd Panzer Group took Oriel, which was just 75 miles south of the Soviet first main defense line. 3 days later, the panzers captured Bryansk, while the German Second Army attacked from the south, encircling the Soviet 3rd and 13th Armies. To the north, the 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies attacked Vyazma, trapping the 19th, 20th, 24th, and 32nd Armies of the Soviet Union. Moscow's first line of defense had been shattered, and over 663,000 Soviet prisoners were captured, bringing the tally since the start of the invasion to 3 million. The Soviets now had only 90,000 men and 150 tanks left for the defense of Moscow. On 13th October, the 3rd Panzer Group was only 87 miles from the capital. Martial law was declared in Moscow. However, almost from the beginning of Operation Typhoon, the weather worsened. Temperatures kept decreasing with heavy rain and accumulating snows, turning the unpaved road into a gluttonous mud and hampering the advance of German tanks. Also, the supply situation for the Germans rapidly deteriorated. On 31st October, the German Army High Command ordered a halt to the Operation Typhoon so that the Germans could reorganize and resolve the increasing severe logistical problems. The pause gave the Soviets time to consolidate their positions and organize formations of newly activated reservists. In over a month, along with 1,000 tanks, 11 new armies, including 30 divisions of Siberian troops that were better suited in such a tough condition, were deployed to assist in defending the city. Battle of Moscow and Soviet counterattack. With the mud problem solved due to the cold weather, on the 15th November, the Germans resumed the attack on Moscow. The Germans intended to move the 3rd and 4th Panzer Armies across the Moscow-Volga Canal and envelop the city from the northeast, while the 2nd Panzer Group attacked Tula, and then closed on Moscow from the south. As the Soviets reacted to their flanks, the 4th Army would attack the center. In 2 weeks of fighting, lacking sufficient fuel and ammunition, the Germans still slowly advanced to Moscow. In the south, the 2nd Panzer Group was being blocked by the Soviet Army. On 22nd November, Soviet Siberian units counterattacked and defeated the 2nd Panzer Group. However, the 4th Panzer Group pushed the Soviet 16th Army back and succeeded in crossing the Moscow-Volga Canal, the last major obstacle before Moscow. The German 7th Panzer Division stood less than 22 miles from the Kremlin and the Red Square, but a powerful counterattack by the Soviet Army on 28 November drove them back. In the northwest of Moscow, the Germans had reached Krasnaya Polyana, present-day Lobnya, which was only 18 miles from the Kremlin. But once again, the fierce opposition of the Soviet Army and the difficult logistics problems hampered Germany's advance. However, the German 258th Infantry Division could approach Moscow as a unit out of the division, discovered a weak spot in the Soviet line of defense. On December 2, 1941, several light vehicles and motorcycles made their way to Himki, a town near the Moscow belt. From there, several German officers saw the glittering onion-shaped domes of the Kremlin and the tower of the Red Square through binoculars. At that time, they were only 14 miles from the Kremlin. Many argued that this story must have been exaggerated, or the sights had been mistaken, as buildings in Moscow were quite short at the time, and tall buildings were constructed along the highway outside the city center. Moreover, Himki's infrastructures in 1941 did not allow anyone to see the dome from such a long distance. On the other hand, the Soviet Union disguised the entire Kremlin and Red Square. The yellow towers were painted in dark colors, and the Kremlin was painted to resemble buildings with windows. The Red Square was covered by camouflage and plywood to disrupt the layout of the city, so that the German air fleet couldn't spot their target. Lenin's mausoleum was disguised as a 2-story building. Therefore, the glittering dome seen by the Germans could be snow and frost reflected from another building under sunlight. Or maybe what they saw was the dome of the church or a tower in Moscow. But whatever the truth was, one thing for sure is that Khimki was the closest point to Moscow that the Germans could reach throughout the entire operation. Some last German soldiers waiting for never-coming reinforcements were expelled from Khimki by the local militia in T-34 tanks. Severe weather with heavy snow and difficulty in transporting military supplies prevented Germany from defending against the Soviet Union. On December 5th, the Soviet Union conducted a total counterattack on the whole battlefield. Aftermath of Operation Barbarossa. On January 7, 1942, when the Soviet counteroffensive halted, the Germans were ousted 60 to 150 miles away from Moscow. The military campaign to defend Moscow came to an end, bringing vitality back to the city. In the spring of 1942, abandoned factories and shops were back in operation, and the lives of the Moscow people returned to normal. The Battle of Moscow was reportedly completed in early January 1942. The Soviet Army's counteroffensive, however, continued to develop into a full-scale offensive on the Soviet-German front in the winter-spring months of 1942. Despite having been blocked at the gateway of the Soviet capital, Nazi Germany's potential was still enormous and couldn't be broken completely after that defeat. The Soviet army temporarily regained strategic control. Although it still lacked a strong reserve force to ensure a decisive advance in this battle, the victory in Moscow became a breakthrough for the Soviet-German war. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our channel.